In Moscow, the strikers held out a little longer, furiously encouraged by Lenin. But the army was still loyal to the Tsar, and the army had the guns, the cavalry, the resources, and the confidence. The strikers had defeat and death. The 1905 revolt was confused and incoherent, but it brought the whole revolutionary mood into the open. The socialist movement was now an evident part of the political pattern of Russia. For those who did not die, there was the long, cold road to Siberia. For 12 years, then, the revolt was over. Once again, Lenin escaped arrest and fled to Paris. There, in the usual back room of the exile's life, he wrote and argued and denounced all who disagreed. Lenin insisted that only he and his group of uncompromising Marxists were Bolshevik, the majority. The moderations of Plekhanov and his like were Menshevik, the minority. Capri, improbably enough, was on the list of revolutionary rendezvous. There Lenin went to visit Maxim Gorky, and there were more arid intellectual contentions. In Prague, at the party conference of 1912, came Lenin's final breach with the old comrades. From now on, Lenin and the Bolsheviks were out to win the revolution their way. That year in Russia, the revolt stirred again. Of all Russia's melancholy workers, those of the leaner mines were the most enslaved and degraded. They went on strike, and the soldiers from St. Petersburg shot down an unarmed meeting, and 270 were killed on the spot. At that there rose in Europe a howl of horror and protest so loud, and in Russia a national strike so great, that a certain awe fell on the government, and a few tentative measures of conciliation came about. Lenin was closing in. He moved his base to Krakow in Galicia, but all this time another party was at work, the Okhrana, the Tsarist secret service. By now they were well on to the revolutionary movement. They had widely infiltrated it. They actually took part in smuggling the papers and running the guns, meanwhile encouraging the schisms and retarding the movement. But, and it was somehow very Russian, even the secret service men were divided. Some of them became real revolutionaries. And now it was 1914. Suddenly, all over Europe, multitudes of dissidents remembered they were loyalists. A wave of patriotism drove the conception of revolution into abeyance. Lenin was consumed with impatience. What had happened to European socialism? Where was the workers' solidarity that should quench this war? The Russian army was immense. In spite of its parade ground appearance, it was also unprepared, underarmed, underfed, ill-led, and doomed. In their millions, the Russian soldiers vanished into the wintry wilderness of Poland, to defeat after defeat, to catastrophe after catastrophe. At least 4 million never came back. At home, the privations grew almost beyond the point of toleration. The Russian mood alternated between hysteria and Slavonic despair. By 1917, it was a country ripe for chaos, and Lenin was not there. By now, he was in Zurich. What detonated the February Revolution was small enough, an industrial dispute in the Putilov works in Moscow. The immense difference between this and all that had gone before was that now the soldiers were moving to the side of the citizens. Most of the garrison of Petrograd, as the capital was now called, moved over to the workers, the leaderless demonstrators who were now storming and parading the streets. This wasn't politics. The politics were to come. And now the Tsar had gone. He'd been challenged and had abdicated. After 4 centuries, Russia had no Tsar, and it still had no Lenin. In the austere bourgeois peace of Switzerland, Lenin was frantic to return. The revolution for which he'd lived his life had begun, and he wasn't there. It would go by default. It would get into the wrong hands. Yet how could he, Lenin, cross the battlefields of a Europe at war? Petrograd, without a Tsar and without a Lenin, was now an arena for politicians contending for power. The seething impatience of Lenin and the exiles of Zurich produced a melodrama worthy of the times. The famous sealed train that no one might leave nor enter on its journey. The Germans, most eager to get a good disruptive force like Lenin back among their enemies, agreed to send him there by train. Some 30 men and women traveled on that famous train, the hardcore of the exiled revolutionaries. Lenin, Zinoviev, Radek, Clara Zetkin, Sokolnikov, all pipelined through a Europe at war, back to a Russia they had none of them seen for years. And so, after 12 years, Lenin returned to the Finland station. The new battle was joined. The provisional government wanted order at home and victory in the war. Lenin and the Bolsheviks wanted the revolution under the control of the revolutionists and professional party workers, and they wanted an end to the war. Any end. This Lenin expounded in the April thesis to the Petrograd Council of Soviets. The slogan was, land, bread, peace. In 1917, then, the 2 ablest Marxists in the world were brought together again in guarded friendship, with the return from America of Trotsky. His task was to be to end the war. In the minds of the soldiers, it was already ended. Everywhere along the German front, the opposing armies were fraternizing, grateful for any respite from this cruel campaign. Whole regiments packed up, quick, deserted. The Tsar's army defected in tens of thousands. Whatever might be said in Russia, their war was over. That much of the revolution was, for them, accomplished. In Petrograd, the revolution was established, and what had, in fact, changed? Lenin continually demanded that the provisional government give way to a republic of the proletariat and an end to the war. That July brought out 300,000 people into the streets. On the other side, Kerensky, whose father had taught Lenin Simbirsk. He was prime minister, and he subdued the impatient Bolsheviks. Their headquarters, the commandeered house of the ballerina Kreshenskaya, was sacked. The left was routed. Lenin, disguised as a railwayman, slipped over into Finland, indicted for treason. For now the story was, Lenin was a German agent, sent in by the Germans, paid to end the war. He furiously denied it, but hiding didn't help. Now, in 1917, with Lenin still away, the campaign was on for the elections for the Constituent Assembly. The Bolsheviks remained in a high condition of exhilaration. As they had once cried, the Tsar must go, they now cried, Kerensky must go, power to the Soviets. Yet, when the 42 million votes came to be cast later, the Bolsheviks were to get less than 10 million. The other social revolutionaries got 21 million, 58%. But Lenin said, the interests of the revolution stand over those of the Constituent Assembly, and on its first meeting, the Bolsheviks imposed their will.